Hey, Richie, how's it going? Back again?
Yes, it's that time. I always love when we get a Ecwid user on, so I'm excited for today.
Yeah, I love hearing the unique stories and also how they're using Ecwid. So, without further ado, let's bring on our guest, Liz Abunaw. How are you?
I am doing well today. Thanks for
All
having
right,
me.
of course. And what's your company?
My company is 40 Acres Fresh Market. We are based in Chicago, Illinois. We are a small neighborhood grocer that currently operates as a mobile produce market. What that means is we do pop-up markets and delivery service as we work to scale towards building our first store on the west side of Chicago. Our mission is to increase access to affordable fresh food in underserved communities.
Now, I imagine you didn't just start out one day with that as your business. Bring us back to where the idea came from and how you got started.
Yeah, so I'm actually not from Chicago. I am from upstate New York. I have lived all over the place: Minnesota, Michigan, Minnesota again, Philadelphia area. And in 2012, I moved to Chicago to go to grad school. My life in grad school was pretty insular. All of my friends came from school and we lived in a handful of neighborhoods and we only hung out in a handful of neighborhoods. And food access is not something I've ever had to think about in my life, not just in terms of affording food, but the ease of knowing where I can go to go grocery shopping and getting to it easily, accessibly. Never thought about it. One day in 2016, I was running an errand that had nothing to do with groceries. It was actually some type of mystery shopping thing. And I didn't know exactly where the location of the mystery shop was. Like I had the address. You have an address for somewhere, but you don't know exactly where that is. And so you're just going to let GPS tell you how to get there. And so I decided I didn't want to drive just in case there was bad parking. So it looked like it was on a nearby bus route. So I was just like, okay, I'm just going to hop on the bus and go over there. And so it turns out that the location was on the west side of Chicago in this neighborhood in Chicago called Austin. I'd never been to Austin before, but as soon as I stepped off that bus at the corner of Chicago Avenue and Laramie, I looked around and I'm like, Toto, we are not in Kansas anymore. Where am I? And because I look around and I see a lot of vacant lots or vacant storefronts, check cashing places, buildings that I'm like, is that open or is that shut down? I can't really tell. At that moment, I realized I need cash. I forgot that I need cash to do this mystery shop. I was like, okay, let me go find a bank. And there was actually a bank on the corner that said Laramie State Bank. And I was like, is that bank open? Can I go in there and use their, oh, that's not open. I'm like, okay, check Google Maps. There's no bank within walking distance. Great. I was like, next best thing, let me go to a CVS or Walgreens, buy one thing and get cash back. Couldn't find a CVS or Walgreens. One thing people should know about me is I'm extremely cheap. I do not like corner store ATMs. I don't like currency exchange ATMs because they charge an arm and a leg to get out money. I only needed like $20 to $30. And I wasn't going to pay a $5 ATM fee to get it. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to the nearest grocery store. Even if I have to stand in line behind somebody who has a cart full of food, I'm going to do it just so I don't have to pay an exorbitant ATM fee. Couldn't find a grocery store. So I'm on a major commercial corridor and I can't find banking. I can't find healthcare retail and I can't find grocery. Those are three pretty basic things that people need on a regular basis in their lives. And so I was like, where the heck am I? What neighborhood is this? This is so like, it didn't make sense to me because these are never things I had to think about living in other neighborhoods in Chicago. And so I look around and I'm like, this is a predominantly Black neighborhood. Oh, I think I know where I am. I think I'm on the west side. And I've heard about the west side. I hear about the west side on the news. It's often not positive. I'm like, so this is what people have been talking about in all these years that I've lived in Chicago. At that point, I've been 4 years. I've always heard about this tale of two cities. And it was the first time I saw it up close. The inequity, the inequality, the segregation in Chicago. I was like, oh, this is like for real. And I've just been able to like ignore it or not be aware of exactly where it existed and how up until that moment when I actually needed something to accomplish a task in that neighborhood. So I'm not going to say that 40 Acres came immediately after that, but what it did was it changed my lens on how I viewed my own neighborhood and other neighborhoods that I frequently spent time in. And one day I was on the north side and I was shopping at this produce market that has now since gone on to grow grocery store heaven, but I loved this place. It was like an affordable produce market in one of the richest neighborhoods in Chicago. And it was packed all the time. Everybody loved this place. It's called Stanley's. And I think I was buying strawberries there for like $1 or like $1.50. And if anybody does the grocery shopping in their household, you know, a pack of strawberries on sale is typically $2.50. Like regular pack is anywhere from $4 to $5. And if you're at Whole Foods, it could be up to like $8. So I'm like, how am I in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Chicago buying really good, affordable produce at a price like this? And yet a few weeks ago, I was in this other neighborhood where I couldn't find a grocery store for miles. And in my head said, somebody should put a store like this over there. Like that's what would make sense. And if you've ever found yourself having the same conversation with different people, this topic just kept coming up in conversation. And whether it's me bringing it up or steering the conversation this way, I just kept saying to people, somebody should put a Stanley's over on the West Side. And I don't know how somebody evolved into, I should do that, but that was the evolution of it. And it makes sense because before moving to Chicago, I had worked for General Mills for 10 years. And I didn't just work for General Mills, I worked in sales at General Mills. And when you work in sales at a CPG company, that really means you're working in the grocery industry because your customers are grocery stores. You're calling on grocery stores. So my frame of reference for solving a problem that I quote unquote Columbused or discovered, I didn't discover, is always there. It's just, I became aware of it was through this lens of it would be really cool to open a neighborhood fresh market in the Austin neighborhood. I didn't know what I was doing. I never ran a grocery store before. I mean, the closest to that was bagging groceries at my local neighborhood supermarket when I was in high school. So I didn't know a lot. So it didn't make sense to me at the time to research finding real estate, getting a lease, upgrading a site for equipment and all that stuff and opening a store. I'm like, I have no clue what I'm doing. And I don't have the money to do that. So one of the things I had learned while I was in business school, because that's why I came to Chicago, and I have a concentration in entrepreneurship, was this idea of a minimum viable product. And so one of my classmates suggested, he's like, well, why don't you just get a whole bunch of produce, set up some tables in like a parking lot or something and sell produce and see who buys it? I was like, well, that doesn't sound too hard. So I figured out where to buy produce at wholesale prices. I went into the neighborhood and talked to people and got pointed in the direction of this man named Malcolm. He owned Sankofa Cultural Arts and Business Center. And when I was finally able to pin him down, I got him to give me space in Sankofa for free on a Saturday for like 4 hours to host a market. And so that's how I started. I started with a pop-up market. And I would say it was a moral victory more than a financial victory. I way overbought on inventory, but what I was able to do was transform this community room or this big hall that they had into a market with like beautiful displays of fresh produce, and several dozen people came in and shopped, and they were like, we love this, we need this in our neighborhood. And even though it wasn't like hundreds of people, the people who were there told others. And then I started getting calls from people like, I heard you do this market. Will you do this at our location? And I also had more produce to sell. So when it was all over, I had a lot more produce to sell. So I was like, gotta figure out a way to sell this. I better do another one of these markets. Let me hurry up before the stuff goes bad, find another place to set up something similar. And so it kind of, the pop-up market concept went from there. And if you know anything about grocery, you'll know it's not a margin business, meaning you don't make a ton of money on each individual item that you sell. Like doubling your money on an apple that cost you 50 cents is only $1. Like it's not really, the money is in the volume. So in order to move more produce, I was like, I could deliver. And so that kind of started the beginning of trying to create this like omni-channel business that would eventually scale into a brick and mortar store that would already have a customer base, that would already have a delivery base. And so that's kind of the origin story of 40 Acres. So we turned 5 in January, on January 20th of this year, 5 years since the day we launched. And we still do pop-up markets. We now have a very robust delivery service where most of our revenue comes from recurring revenue and a subscription service that's actually based on the Ecwid platform. And we are currently deep, like elbow deep in the development process for our first brick and mortar store. We're currently waiting on a construction permit from the city of Chicago. So if you work at the building department of the city of Chicago and you just happen to be listening to this podcast, hurry up and give us our construction permit.
I love it. I love that. I have no connections to the city of Chicago. So just
darn it. You just never know. You just always kind of want to put it out there just in case.
Make that into a clip and then target them on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Put a little ad there.
Issue the permit, please.
So before we get back into the brick and mortar, I want to back us up to the first pop-up. Like that is the MVP right there. And
yeah.
And at the end of the day, this is really a simple business. Like you buy produce, you sell produce, right? Like that's been done for thousands of years, really.
Simple.
Yeah. So how long did it have this kind of this idea was floating around in your head? How long did it take before you actually said, fine, I'm just going to do it?
It took over a year. So the initial idea, probably the experience of going to the West Side and seeing like the Tale of Two Cities story, that happened in fall of 2016. By the end of that year, I was kind of kicking around this idea of, well, what if I tried to open like my own version of Stanley's, like a low-cost produce market or a fresh market on the West Side? A couple of things started coming together. So the first thing was that my alma mater, which is University of Chicago Booth School of Business, they started this alumni program called the Adventure Capital Challenge, where they would give alums, you have to apply and you have to be selected, but they'd give alums a pretty sizable grant to go pursue a nascent career interest. So like one woman decided to explore woodworking. Another one was trying to build a database of Black nonprofit organizations. That was like the first round. And so they presented what they did and they opened up the program again for another round in 2017. So the first one was 2016. They opened up another round in 2017. I had never even heard about it until a woman I went to school with dragged me to their presentations and was like, I think this would be cool. I wanted to go to it. You should come with me. And I had nothing better to do. And they were offering free refreshments. So if you offer me free food, I will pretty much go anywhere. So I went and I was like, yo, I have this nascent career interest just kind of percolating around in my mind. I don't have any funding for it. Could this be my funding? And so I applied with the idea of 40 acres. At the time, I think I called it 40 acres fruits and vegetables. And I got roundly rejected. So at the time, I think I applied with the idea of using their capital to actually like build out a store. And it was half-baked and not well thought out. So thankfully, they told me no. But they're like, you should still keep exploring this idea. Then it was September 12th of 2017. At the time I was working for Microsoft. I got a phone call from my boss with HR on the phone, letting me know that my position had been eliminated and that I was about 2 months from being laid off. And so initially I was like, oh, that's not good. But then he started talking and he's like, you'll remain on payroll for 2 months and you can search for another job within Microsoft. And if you land somewhere, you'll just roll into that job. If not, there's a severance package. It's already past bonus time. So you've made your bonus for the year. We'll pay for Cobra for 6 months. So as he starts to talk, I'm like, I got some savings. I got some stock. This actually isn't the worst thing that could have happened to me. For the first time in my life, I am in a position where I don't have to work immediately. I'm eventually going to have to work, but I don't have to work. So what would I do if I don't have to work? And 40 acres came right back to my brain. I'm like, should I try it? Should I not? Like, should I? Should I rent out my apartment and go to Bali for like 3 months and hang out and then come back and find a job? But 40 acres just kept sticking in my brain. And so I was like, let me try it. So I started hanging around in the Austin neighborhood on the West Side. I started talking to people. Everybody I talked to would point me to somebody else I should talk to. Oh, you need to talk to the people at this organization, Austin Coming Together. Oh, you should go to meetings for this other organization called the Leaders Network. Oh, you need to talk to Malcolm because Malcolm runs Austin African American Business Networking Association. And so I just started showing up and I was like, I want to do this thing and I want to try a pop-up market. And so I think I started organizing in November, December of 2017. And then we launched and did our first market January 20th of 2018.
Yeah, I like the extra color there because there's usually some sort of impetus to it. Like for you, you actually had this great soft landing of,
I got fired.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I got fired really well.
Yeah, that's a good way to get fired.
It's the best way. So I have had friends who were like, oh my God, my company's having layoffs. And even though I think I'm leaving anyway, I don't want to get laid off. I'm like, why? Get laid off, take the severance because it lets you take your time. Like it was not a hit to my ego. Let me tell you, my parents, when I told them I was getting laid off, they were freaked out. They were like, you have to find another job. And I was like, actually, I don't. I can live for a little while. Like I've prepared well for this. I am in a position where I don't have to work. And I think that freedom of not worrying about how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to put food on the table for anywhere from 3 to 6 to 12 months is incredibly freeing. And I recognize that there is a lot of privilege in being able to be in that position.
I'm glad you took advantage of it and did the right thing with it instead of going off to Bali for 3 months, which would have been fun. But
it would have been fun. It would have been fine because I have a friend who did that and she now runs her own business out of Bali. And so I was like, I don't have anybody else to take care of but me, and I can take care of me just fine. What would I do if I just rested? I like to call that period of time fun employment.
There's so much to unpack there, so many lessons. I mean, we could go on forever. I'm going to try to drill in on just a couple here. First, you weren't on a mission that day to start a business. You were on a mission doing some mystery shopping of some kind or game. I'm not exactly sure, but we don't need to go into that piece.
I was trying to make a little extra side cash to pay my gym membership.
Bottom line was you weren't saying, I'm going to go on a bus ride and come up with a way to start a business. And so it started with the perspective. You saw something that was missing. You didn't click on a YouTube video, how to make $10,000 a month in the next 60 days. This was, I'm living my life. I'm trying to figure a couple things out. And I came to this part of town that I heard about and wow. I have not experienced this in my life. Not exactly sure how many months, 6, 9 months, 12 months. You end up getting laid off. But in the meantime, it's still in there. You're not saying I'm going to do this, but it's still there. It's still popping up every now and again. And you tried the grant, didn't work. And then now here's this moment where there's a decision to be made. And it's, do I go celebrate? And like we said, there's no really right or wrong answer other than this is the answer you chose and you made the most out of it. I just want to pause there for a quick second because you were trying to solve a problem. I think there's a dynamic that comes into play when people are starting a business, when they know they're here to solve a problem. That is where an entrepreneur really needs to live. We talked a little bit this in pre-chat, not about that exact story, but just the people who think they're going to get rich being an entrepreneur, sometimes they'd be better off just taking 10, 20% of the money they make at their job and investing it in the stock market or real estate and call it a day. Because if you're not ready to solve problems, then you might not be picking the best path. So I just wanted to really touch on that for a second, that nowhere in that story did I hear, and this is the way that I thought I would make the most money. There is something to be said about what is the problem I'm solving, because when you have a big enough why, that's the thing that's going to help you keep going through the tough times, especially in the one that you picked, because there's people who are having way more issues. You're going to start a business when you get laid off, when somebody that you're helping serve might get kicked out of their house.
Liz, what I caught there as well was when you started, it was more that you started, I'm sure there was a plan as well, but you just started talking to people. Right? Like you didn't know where the first pop-up was going to be. I wasn't on a YouTube video. That was, I need to go talk to people and network and figure it out. People always assume maybe there's a checklist they can follow. Maybe that should be the first part of the checklist. Start talking to people and figure it out.
I think market research is woefully underutilized. So there was a few things that I did. One, I recognized that I wanted to open a business in a neighborhood that I didn't live in, that I'm not from, and that I was not familiar with. So I need to get myself familiar with that neighborhood. So I talked to people. I spent several afternoons looking up the different grocery options that were in the borders of that neighborhood and auditing them, taking pictures, seeing what they offered, looking at their pricing. In grocery, we call it the catchment area. What's in this trade area? Who's operating? And what does it look like? And when I did that, I was like, there's large swaths of this neighborhood that are not served at all. There's other sections that are served, but the options that they have are middling at best. And I felt I could come to market with a better offering. I didn't know exactly how, but I love the grocery store. I think by the time I was 35, my favorite social outing is grocery shopping. I love the grocery store like 25-year-old me loved a good club. I love in-store radio. I love the smell of the coffee aisle. I love bins of produce. My fruit bowl in my apartment right now, like I just stack it full of oranges during citrus season. I love it. It's not simply transactional, it is experiential for me. And there are certain stores that I love more than anything. And what I found when I did my market research is there were no stores in that neighborhood that made me feel like I was having an experience. So I did research numerous ways. I researched the quote unquote competition. I spoke to residents who were going to be my customer. I did deep dives into demographic data, not just what's the median income, but I also looked at the income distributions. Because if you simply look at the number at the bottom, which is here's the median income for this neighborhood, what you could miss is a neighborhood with a lower median income may actually have a lot of stratification within that. So they might have a higher concentration on the bottom end, but maybe 25 to 30% of their households are actually middle income households that have money to spend. And so I dove into the numbers of who lives here, how many people have cars. So if you have a car, you can travel further, but if you don't, you probably want to have some type of more convenient neighborhood option. And so I was able to put together a picture of what this neighborhood is telling me verbally it wants, what I'm seeing it doesn't have, and what I think it can support by doing some just basic market research. Because remember, my goal wasn't to do pop-up markets. My goal is to open a store. And so it's like, could a store be viable here? And what I have found is that starting small actually helped me because there were so many failures, and failures didn't tell me, oh, this won't work. What it did was it answered questions and then led to more questions to be asked. And I think in the beginning stages of the beginning stages of starting an actual business, that's really all it is. Like you get more data, and more data should just make you ask more questions. It should make you ask why a million times. Okay, but why am I seeing this? It's interesting because that grant that I applied for in 2017, I reapplied for it in 2018 and I got it. By this point, I had done like 4 to 5 months of pop-up markets. I had a very much more specific idea of how I wanted to use the funding. What I wanted to do was there happened to be this temporary retail space. I want to rent it out for like 30 to 60 days and just be open every day instead of popping up for a day or for a weekend. I wanted to just be there all the time for 30 to 60 days and see what happened. And I can tell you that trial run was an abysmal mess. The traffic was terrible. But what I did is I learned a ton. What I learned is I learned about the grocery leakage in the community. I didn't realize that so many of the grocery dollars were being spent outside the community. I didn't realize that because of disinvestment, because what's supposed to be a commercial corridor was really a glorified throughway to avoid traffic on the highway when going from the neighboring suburb to downtown. And so even though I was like, we have this big display outside, we have this beautiful produce display, you should be able to see it. People were driving by without looking so many times. We had been there for, I think, 25 days. And people who lived right around the corner or right up the street were like, oh, y'all just opened this week? And we're like, no, we've been here. I drive up and down this street every day and I've never seen you. And I'm like, you don't see the balloons, you don't see the big tent, you don't see the sign, like you missed us for the last 25, you never noticed us. And all the time that you have driven by, I realize there's not a ton of foot traffic. It's all car traffic. So it's harder to stop car traffic. Like I learned so much from failing. I was blessed enough to have put together enough of a track record to fail on somebody else's dime for the summer.
Curious, as you're building this out, so more or less you're building the plane as you're flying it, right?
Yeah.
You're adjusting it, you're trying new things, you try this temporary retail store. How are you communicating with the people other than the obvious talking to them and the different meetings and networking? Were you communicating mostly through social? Were you gathering email addresses and emailing out where you were going to be next? What was the process as you were moving from pop-up to pop-up with the goal in mind that you were going to eventually open a actual retail grocery store? How is this communication taking place?
That's a great question. All of the above. So I think I started the newsletter in 2018. It was either 2018 or 2019. So that was one thing. When I started the business, I immediately got on social media. So I set up a Facebook page, an Instagram page for it. I found a student at my undergrad alma mater, my sorority chapter. They got all of their flyers done through her. So I had her do my flyers, and college students work for peanuts. So like, getting great graphics for like $75 a pop. I would do a lot of canvassing. At one point, I even did direct mail to households, which was a waste of money because when people don't know what they're looking at, they just throw it away. And if you have no brand equity, people are throwing your stuff away. So it's not maybe the best idea. And then I went to community meetings every week. And I would just talk about it. I'm like, hey, I'm having this market. I keep hearing you guys say, you guys want a grocery store. Well, I'm trying to open a grocery store. Here's a step in that direction. Support all the steps. Support the steps. Support the steps. And so I also learned at that time that even though the neighborhood was demanding grocery options, they weren't necessarily demanding them for me. I was nobody's savior. I had to learn that just because I had an idea, I still had to get resident buy-in and permission to implement that idea in their community. And that just takes time and consistency to build credibility. And in building credibility over time, what started to happen is I found myself attracting partners who had things that I did not have in that community. And that is like social networks, social infrastructure. They could reach people that I didn't know. All of a sudden, I was getting invited to churches to present and speak and talk about the market, or other organizations were promoting for me, or they were inviting me to their larger events within the neighborhood to set up a produce stand. And so I was finding people to come along and get in this boat with me, because when you talk about food access, when you talk about grocery, it is not as simple, especially in communities that don't have it and that have been underserved for a very long time. There's a lot of structural forces there that you can't just simply build a store and it's like, oh, if you build it, they will come. It's a large effort. And so having support from local nonprofit organizations, from local elected officials, that all helped push 40 acres along. And so by the time the pandemic hit, all of our pop-up markets shut down. We'd built enough of a reputation, and we had this small little piece of our business that was in delivery. It was very small at the time. So when people stopped going to the grocery store and they needed options, they were like, wait, you guys deliver? And we're like, yeah, we deliver. And that's what blew up. But we built the building blocks of that through just consistency and being there, doing the markets, getting the messaging out. This is not a charity. We are a business. We value you as consumers. We see you as consumers. We will treat you as consumers. And we're trying to build something to earn your dollar. And I think that really resonated with people.
Yeah, I love it. Like, you can't just show up on the first days of the pandemic and say, all right, I have a subscription delivery business here. You were already there. You had some name recognition from the pop-ups. That's a good segue into the subscriptions. So tell us how you got started with subscriptions and kind of the website and the tech behind that.
Yeah. So delivery service started as a solution for inventory management. When you buy wholesale, you're buying lower unit cost, but more volume. For example, with produce, if I bought a case of apples is 40 pounds. So I need to figure out how to move through 40 pounds of apples. So one of the earliest ideas I had is like, if I can't sell it all at a market, I have a car, why can't I deliver it? And so our delivery service went through many iterations of how do you get it out to people and then how do you capture their orders. And initially it was just like putting it on my Facebook page and like my friends would order or my neighbor would order and stuff like that. But eventually figuring out through feedback from people, once again, that this is cumbersome. This is not how I shop online. And so test and iterate. That's pretty much it. So figuring out first, it's like free services. What can I use out there that is free that makes this more user friendly? Then it's okay, now that it's a little bit more user friendly, how do I capture these in a way that it's not just me? Oh, I now have staff. How can this be visible to them in a way that they can use it? So in the early days of delivery, one of the delivery customers loved the service, absolutely loved it. And she's like, I use this all the time, but I know I'm going to forget. And so she's like, if there was a way that I could set it and forget it, and I could get produce that gets delivered to me every 2 weeks, that would be amazing. So oftentimes your business's next product or your business's next move doesn't come from you, the business owner. It typically comes from something your customer's asking for. And so she wasn't the only person who asked for it. Shout out to Kate Ridley. Then I had to figure out how to make it happen. We had used other payment processing platforms, and I couldn't figure out the combination of user interface and having the correct selection of the items we wanted to offer for a subscription service. And we knew that for a subscription service, we should pretty much stick to a flat rate box. Different kinds of boxes, different kinds of rates to let people kind of mix and match what they wanted. But we couldn't do a subscription of, I want 3 apples, 2 oranges, of letting people select a la carte every week or every other week. So we came up with produce boxes, and we came up with a very low entry price point. And it was like, okay, you can get an all fruit, all veg, or a mix of both. And here's the different price points at which you could order these 3 different types of boxes. And we tried it, I think, through PayPal as the platform. And it was just really difficult to automate the billing. And so I just started looking around at other produce delivery services. And there was another company who does, actually, she's been doing it longer than I have. She started, I think, in 2016. I started in 2018. She did pop-up markets and she did delivery service. So I was on her website and I was like, how is she running her delivery? And they did like a produce box service, same thing. I think you could order monthly. And I remember going through their shopping cart and their process. And at the bottom, I read it as powered by Ecwid. I'm like, what is Ecwid? And so I looked it up, and it was very intuitive for me to figure out the system. I didn't have to have a strong tech background. Even though I had previously worked for Microsoft, I knew nothing about technology, to be honest. And I was able to put in our products. I was able to put in pictures. I was able to delineate which zip codes we would deliver to, put in delivery fees, add in the sales tax, and the sales tax was already calculated. You just had to pick what kind of products were being taxed and where they were being taxed from. And it's like, oh, this isn't too bad. And so I think we set that up in early 2020. And then, by March, that second week in March is when the world went to hell. We were supposed to have a market March 13th through the 15th. And the night of March 12th, me and my general manager at the time made the decision. We're like, something's happening. The NCAA tournament's canceled. The Olympics just got canceled. We knew that COVID could be dangerous for older people. And our pop-up markets, we had a lot of seniors coming to our pop-up markets. So our idea was cancel March just out of an abundance of caution. Like, we'll be back up and running in April. This will be fine. This is going to pass very quickly, but we'll offer free delivery. So we won't charge anybody delivery fees. And so that's what we did. We canceled the weekend market and put out, hey, free delivery. If you order between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we'll deliver it for free. No delivery fee. Like, the food isn't free, but the delivery fee.
You also had a lot of food too, because you probably had pre-ordered it for your markets, right?
Well, thankfully, we were able to cancel a lot of those orders. But what happened is delivery used to be maybe on a good week, we would have 7 deliveries in a week. I think on that Saturday, the 14th, we got 7 delivery orders in a day. Oh my, interesting. And then 7 turned to 10, and then 10 turned to 15. And it was like orders were coming in all day. We're like, where are these people coming from? What just happened? And then we had the one-time order, so you could order once, and that was in a whole different platform than the subscription service. But we put a link to the subscription service in the one-time order page, and then people just started ordering subscriptions. Then subscriptions started flying in. I have the app on my phone, the Ecwid cart was just chilling at the top of my phone, like all day, every day through like the first 6 months of 2020. And I'm like, what is going on? But we had built enough credibility within this community for people to turn to us when they were looking for fresh produce options, when stores were either one, sold out, or they did not feel safe going in public to the grocery store. If you think about entrepreneurship, they always talk about the hockey stick. And so that was like the inflection point in our hockey stick of like, it's just steady growth. And then, and we're like, whoa, what the heck just happened? But we wouldn't have been able to get so many people on our subscription service so fast if we hadn't pivoted and gotten on Ecwid like a month or two before the pandemic shut everything down.
Well, I'm glad you did, and I'm sure you are as well. The best thing about subscriptions, by the way, is you already know what you're getting paid. That next month, you know, these are the sales I have. Now you know what to buy and pack and ship.
It's amazing for everything. For staffing, once it's in our calendar, I can look at any day. I can look into next week and know I need to pack X many boxes for this day at the very least. Yes, more one-time orders will come and supplement that, but here's the minimum level of labor I need to service these orders. Is this an 8-hour shift? Is this a 6-hour shift? Is this a 3-hour route? Or is this a 5-hour route? All those things, you know, when you have that recurring revenue. And yes, people cancel subscriptions all the time, but what is that word? The attrition rate. If you're adding more customers, even as you're losing, you're still winning.
Yeah, one quick thing too, that it was wise to choose the flat rate, because as a buyer, if you were trying to say, okay, they're going to have 3 apples and 4 carrots, that could be a logistical nightmare, a monetary nightmare, so many different things. Unlike a lot of other Ecwid users, this is also a perishable. So you have a limited amount of time. This inventory is going to go bad at some point in time.
Ticking time bomb.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, another perception play is there's a chance that the customer is still getting some form of psychological surprise and delight. They know how much they're spending, but they don't know what they're going to get yet. So it's a little bit interesting that they're like, I got some turnips and some apples and what's this new thing I've never had before?
Oh my gosh. So much of the feedback that we've received is, I've never eaten turnip greens before and I love them. You guys have introduced me to so many different kinds of fruits and vegetables I never used. I wouldn't normally buy this. I have one customer who I tend to see out at local events, and she gets the largest size box. She gets a $30 Mix It Up every week. And I'm like, that's a lot of vegetables. Well, she's like, well, I'm a vegetarian. And she said, your box is my weekly challenge. I don't care what you give me. I'm going to figure out how to cook it. I'm going to make it taste good. And it's like, what do you got for me? Oh, you got okra this week? Oh, bet. I'm making gumbo. Or, oh, you got Brussels sprouts this week? All right. I'm going to figure this out. Oh, okay. I haven't seen eggplant in a while. Don't worry. I'm going to find something. For it. And I love that attitude of discovery. And so we lean into that with our marketing, with our messaging. We just say, listen, you can give us some guidance. And that was the great thing about Ecwid as well, is that the user interface contained a field for customer notes to tell us things like, hey, you have to knock twice, run around the building, and then knock 3 more times. And then that's the secret code to get you in. People have all types of like, how do you enter my building? Where do I want you to leave it? But it also let them say, I'm allergic to onions, so no onions in my box, but I really, really love squash. And so, sure, we'll give that to you. And so for the most part, the produce box model, I started that because what I started noticing is when I did delivery initially, like I said, I started with like an order form and people could choose the items they wanted, but they were never choosing the items that I needed to get through. So I was like, God, you want stuff, but you keep choosing the greens, but I really want you to choose the cauliflower because I need to get through the cauliflower. So I was like, well, what if I just did a box and I get to put whatever the heck I want to in this box? And so if I have excess inventory, anybody who orders a veggie box, you're getting cauliflower unless you ask not to get cauliflower. So it was a way of me getting through inventory and then marketing it or positioning it as, oh, it's a surprise box. You get what you get, but you'll love it. And so that was really like an inventory control move that we were just able to brand as more of like a let us delight you and excite you and surprise you type thing. And people were super into it. It's interesting because initially we were doing the produce boxes plus a la carte service on delivery. And we just quickly realized we couldn't keep up with all a la carte requests. If you know anything about produce, the pricing fluctuates from week to week. It can fluctuate within a week. Supply fluctuates. So one day corn is plentiful and then one day it's dried up and you can't find it for weeks. And we're like, okay, we're not Amazon. And we have to stop thinking that we can do what the big guys do and work within our limitations and do less. Let's do less. We can't make these promises to people. I can't hold pricing. I can't guarantee supply. So let's get rid of the a la carte option. And we thought that our business would go without an a la carte option, because like people want to choose their stuff. But what we found is that when we said, hey, we're only offering flat rate produce boxes and you don't really get to choose, our business went up. And we're like, oh, and that model of flat rate produce boxes was so conducive to a subscription model. So it kind of all went together as you said, building the plane while you're flying it. You learn these things really quickly, that certain things, they work for one or two customers, but when you at scale of any kind, even when you move from 5 customers to 25 customers, it's like, okay, can't do this. Let's put simplicity in this. And Ecwid really let us scale that simplicity.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I was thinking causation, correlation, who knows? But because of the economics of the community too, it might have actually helped because they knew exactly what they were going to be spending. Exactly. I can put $10 toward this. I can put $20 towards this. Whereas picking and choosing, again, causation, correlation, who knows? But I think there's something to be said about that where someone could say, my family's health is worth putting $20 towards this or whatever the number is.
What was most interesting is realizing who our customers were. So even though Austin is the quintessential underserved neighborhood, there's higher rates of poverty. But remember how I talked about looking at the neighborhood demographics? When I dug into them, I was like, whoa, 33% of households make $50,000 a year or more. Like that's a decent income. And the neighborhood has almost 100,000 residents. And I think like 20,000 households. So I'm like, that's a good number of households that aren't as price sensitive. And so in 2020 or 2021, we actually wound up doing a survey of our customers. And what we found was that, one, they come from all over the city. So even though the brick and mortar store is in the Austin community, we have customers in the neighboring, more affluent suburb. We have them on the north side, on the south side. And what we started to see is that like 60% of our customers actually skew a little bit more affluent, middle class to even affluent, which stabilized our business with a customer base that was economically stable or financially stable in their own household so that we could stick around and be available and do markets and do more and be an option for households that are using SNAP EBT, for households where food security is a little bit more precarious. And so what I found is that even with a social mission and ours around food access, ultimately, we're democratizing food access. Everybody wants to be able to feed their family healthy food that tastes good at an affordable price, that has good quality. Like there's no one who doesn't want that. And so what we found is that if we offer a really great product, if we make people feel that they're getting a really good value, and we offer a high level of service, it's going to appeal to anybody who eats.
And now you get a wider customer base, all giving you the subscription money. And so that kind of sets you up for what I know is kind of coming now, the brick and mortar. So bring us home to the brick and mortar. I know you mentioned there's some difficulties here, but it's so close to the dream. Give us the update on the brick and mortar store.
There's this like 80s hair band song called So Close, But So Far Away. It's like one of those like rock ballads. I remember it from watching MTV as a kid. And that's how it feels. And so we acquired the property in October 2020. And we are still pushing towards just breaking ground on construction. So brick and mortar is happening. I mean, in 2020, I'm like, it's opening in 2021. In 2021, I was like, it'll open in 2022. 2022 was like, it'll open in 2023. And now we're like, maybe 2024. So one thing I've learned is that commercial real estate development is long, arduous, full of constant surprises. And it's not for the faint of heart. If I had known that it would be like this, I probably wouldn't have done it. And I often say that entrepreneurship, you have to have like this confidence in what you bring to the market. and complete obliviousness about what it takes to actually bring it to scale. Because I think if you knew the path, you'd just be like, you know something, I don't need that stress in my life. It's a heady mix, like confidence, but you have to be oblivious. You can't know, because if you know, you won't do it.
Yeah, you're a couple of years in on that. So, okay, yeah. I know there's been a lot. We probably can't go down every.
I won't go down every pain point, but so getting the site is step one. You can't do anything without a site. You can't design a store without knowing the space that you're designing. Like, are you building from the ground up? Are you repurposing an already existing site? What are the constraints of the existing site that you're rehabbing? People are always like, so what's your budget? You don't know your budget until you know what you're designing. And you don't know what you're designing until you get your site. So you might have an idea of, okay, I only want to spend this much on the site, but everything else is like, you just kind of have to figure it out as you go along. So we have had numerous redesigns. Like I said, iteration gets you to a better final product. But when your iteration is at the mercy of architecture, is at the mercy of structural engineering, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing to see if you can do what this idea is you have in your head. Every idea is anywhere from a 2 to 6 week process just to get to a yes or a no or a maybe. And then when you go through 6 weeks and the answer is no, you spent time, you spent money, and now you have to go back to the drawing board to find another idea to spend another 6 weeks just vetting out. So that took up a lot of our 2021. Fundraising takes a long time. And that's everything from acquiring debt. What you'll notice with a lot of large grocery projects, probably anything over 10,000 square feet, because of land use, there's likely public money in there. And so public money takes a long time. And then the longer it takes for you to actually get to open, just the more money the project takes, because there's people that need to get paid. You have your holding costs of just holding the property while you don't actually use it to generate revenue. There's just so much, like I said, I didn't know. And I think we're getting to a really amazing store that's going to be built. Right now, we've submitted to the city of Chicago for our construction permit, and we're held up in fire code. So
just the latest hurdle, it sounds like.
It's
but
just
yeah,
really something.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stick in the online world because brick and mortar, that sounds scary.
It's a scary world. But here's the thing is that a lot of people ask, why don't you just stick to online? You seem to be doing well with the delivery service. There are so many options, especially to expand your customer base, not just in the B2C, but also in B2B. As the healthcare industry is realizing that food impacts health, we can capitalize on that. And so a lot of people are like, why don't you just stick there? Why the headache? Why the sunk cost of a brick and mortar? And I come back to our mission, which is food equity. And you can't bring equity to a neighborhood in terms of healthy food access without permanence. If McDonald's and Popeyes are there permanently, then we need to be there permanently. You have to be part of the neighborhood infrastructure to really affect that change. And grocery is hard, real estate, we just talked about all the headaches, but if you are able to do it right, there's money to be had, in the words of Jay-Z.
I mean, I love it. We could probably end there. Richie, we touched on a lot of things here. Is there any other questions you have?
Specific questions? This is probably already our longest podcast.
I'm sorry.
No apology. I literally was going to say I could probably talk to you for another 2-3 hours. You're the epitome of what the world could use, especially in America, to see what a true entrepreneur is. It's like a firefighter. We call firefighters heroes, but sometimes entrepreneurs are heroes too. They're running into the fire. They're running in to solve problems. And yeah, I heard the mic drop of making money Jay-Z style. And I know that's the goal, but it's pretty obvious where your real mission lies. And you should be able to gladly make money along the way doing that. I just want to applaud you. You're doing great work. I wish there were more entrepreneurs that were doing the same thing. And I look forward to see how it unfolds. We'll definitely have to have you on as a follow-up, and we might have to schedule it out because of this real estate. So it'll probably be a while, but I can tell just based on the way you're talking, your demeanor, everything about you, what you keep coming back to with your mission, that as more things unfold, there's going to be more problem. Not going to scare you here because I'm sure you've thought these out, but I just want to say it's very obvious that you have what it takes to make this happen. And I'm sure your parents, although they were scared in the beginning, are very proud of what you're up to.
They're down with it now. They have their 40 acres t-shirts and sweatshirts that they like to wear.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it was great to have you on the show. But Jess, to answer your question succinctly, I could talk to Liz for another couple hours. So I'll probably just ask her some questions, email, and see how we can help in the future.
Yeah, I knew that was the answer probably, Richie, but I wanted to bring it back home. So Liz, for customers, for people listening out there, where can they find out more about you and the story?
Yeah, so I think the first place is you can head to our website, which is 40acresfreshmarket.com. Let me just make sure the shirt is in this. It's the word 40, not the number. There is no U in the word 40. It is FORTYACRES Fresh Market, 40acresfreshmarket.com. You can find us on Instagram at 40 Acres Fresh Market, Facebook, 40 Acres Fresh Market. Twitter is the only one that's a little off because they didn't give us as many characters for our name. And that is 40. It's the only time we use the 40 Acres Fresh on Twitter. So we post often. Join our newsletter. If you're in Chicago, I highly recommend you try our produce delivery service. We deliver throughout the city of Chicago. So not just the west side, but all the sides and even out into some of the western suburbs up until about Wolf Road. So if you're east of Wolf Road, we got you. And yeah, that's where you find us. You can get merch, you can get produce, and we'd love to hear from you.
All right. So for everybody listening here, I think you got a real story of perseverance here that really kind of speaks to it. And I even heard Liz use the words that we always finish with. You know what to do, everybody. Get out there and make it happen. Bye-bye, everyone.